Up until After Effects CS6, when you worked in a 3D space, you're actually working in what a lot of people call 2.5D. That's because you had a 3D space, but you're working with 2D flat objects. Well, in After Effects CS6, that's changed. You now have the option to work in what might be called a real 3D space, because you can now extrude text and shapes. You do that using the Ray Traced 3D renderer. This little feature is so great. Not only can you extrude text and shapes, you can give them beveled edges, have color on all the sides, front and back, bevels and sides. You can make them transparent, you can have refractive properties, or have objects reflect off of them. It's really a fun feature. The little bit of a gotcha that goes along with this is that it's very processor intensive. If you do not have an Adobe certified graphics processing unit, then you're going to see a great slowdown in the rendering times. This is one of those things where if you want to work with this feature, you probably should get an approved graphics processing unit. All of them come from a company called NVIDIA, and if you want to find out more about these guys, go to the Adobe After Effects website and check out the current list of approved GPUs. So if you don't have one of those cards, you might see your system slow way down during this project, such that you might want to just kind of watch this as a demo. But if you do have one, then go ahead and dive right in. In any event, to see how this works, let's go to Working Files, go to After Effects Projects, and open up 2101 Ray Trace 3D. Got this project with 3 objects in it, the text, this standard shape layer, and this custom-made shape layer. We've also got a light shining in those guys. Right now the light has no effect because none of them are in 3D. Now the first thing you do when you want to extrude text or shapes is you need to turn on 3D for the layer you want to extrude. So we'll start off with the text there and click on the 3D box for it. Now, when you turn on 3D for any layer, or you have a 3D object in there like a light or a camera, you get a little button in the upper right-hand corner of the comp panel. Now, you might not have noticed this before, but it's been there every time we've worked with 3D. That button gives you access to the Composition Settings dialog box. Normally, when you work inside the Composition Settings dialog box, you're working the Basic tab side of things, and you might not even have checked out the Advanced tab. But here it opened up to the Advanced tab because this is where you choose the renderer. Your choice is Classic 3D or Ray Trace 3D. Classic 3D is the newly named Advanced 3D renderer. It used to be called Advanced 3D renderer. Now they've changed it in light of the fact that it isn't so advanced anymore because we got Ray Traced, which is really advanced. So it's called Classic 3D. And by default, that's what you've been working on throughout this course, presumably, unless you switched on Ray Trace by mistake. So we're going to switch on Ray Trace now and click OK. And we're going to get this little message, which we get once per session unless I turn that off. And it says, there are several things you can do with the 3D renderer, like extrude and bevel text and shapes, which we knew, work with reflections and refraction index and several other things. But there are some things that are not rendered by the Ray Trace 3D renderer, which means you lose the options to work with these things like blending modes and track mattes and layer styles. So keep in mind that there is a little bit of a downside. For all the good things you get from the Ray Trace 3D renderer, you do lose a few features. But we're going to forge right on ahead here and click OK. So the first thing we'll work on is the text. And as you might recall, before it was 3D, it had a stroke. When we made it 3D, the stroke remained. But when we switched on Ray Trace 3D, the stroke went away. That stroke is not gone forever. If we switch on a bevel for this, the stroke will reappear. A text stroke behaves differently than a shape stroke, and you're going to see that later. So here we go. Let's work with text. First order of business is kind of rotate a little bit, so I press W for the rotate tool, as they say. So we can sort of see it when we extrude it like that. And now we need to open up the layer, and you'll see it has something new. It has geometry options. When you turn on 3D for a layer, you get a material options property group. But now when you're working in Ray Trace 3D, you get a geometry options. So open up that property group, and you see you have 4 options. 3 bevel-related things, and then extrusion. And extrusion is the big guy. So let's just extrude it. Let's make the extrusion something greater than 0, and look at that. How about that, folks? Right away, you're making 3D text as simple as that. Let's zoom in on it a bit by doing Control or Command plus a couple times. Use the space bar and drag it up like so. And that is so great. Let's just rotate it a little bit. You can play with this guy. Look how the light plays off it like that. It's just great how it shines off like that and reflects, changes depending on the angle. So cool. It has depth to it. I used a relatively thin text here, Times New Roman regular. If you use thick text, the text kind of runs together when you start extruding it like this. And it'll run together even more when you put in a bevel. So let's put in a bevel. Right now the bevel style is none. Even though the bevel depth is 2, there's no bevel, so the bevel depth is irrelevant. There are 3 kinds of bevels, angular, concave, and convex. My favorite is concave, so we'll do angular first. There you go. And let me just kind of increase this a bit. And you might notice we now have a blue bevel. That's because that's the color of the stroke. But I'd rather the bevel actually relate to the original color of the text. So I'm going to turn off the stroke and show you how that works instead. There we go, no stroke. And now we're showing you what happens just with the original color when you go to bevel. It's so cool, angular like that. It's pretty sharp edges like that. Let's change the angular to convex. It's kind of rounded when you go to convex. It's also smooth and subtle. I like that one too. But the coolest looking one is concave. It really has some nice shadows and shading and dark areas and highlights. Really cool. Just bring it around like that. Excellent. Now that you've done this, you can put colors on the sides. And you do that inside the animate menu here for the text. So you go to animate menu and look at all the extra stuff now that you can animate. The front, bevel, side, back. It's really great. So let's go to side and change the color for side for RGB. By default, it's red, which is kind of extreme, right? So let's change that to something a little less extreme. Maybe make it darker blue like that. We can change the bevel as well. Now you don't go to animate anymore. Now you go down to add for that single animator. Well, let's color the bevel here. Go over to color again, RGB. I'm thinking we might want to make this one a little bit less dramatic. So we'll go bevel color and make it a very light blue like that. Similar to what we started with. There we go. We can turn it around and color the back as well, like you might want to surprise folks with the color on the back, so you can add color on the back as well. And this time, let's just accept the default red, right? And it looks dark until you turn it into the light like that. Reacts to the light. If you look at the menu over here, you see there are many kinds of properties that you can animate in terms of the bevel now. And these things are material options, which I'll discuss in other lessons. Let's move over to the shape and see how it behaves differently than the text. I'll close this down, go to Shift / and we'll take a look at the shape. Now, the shape has a couple of things. It has a stroke and it has a gradient. Well, gradients don't live inside ray trace 3D space. So when I turn on 3D for this layer, that gradient's going to go away. And it's going to pick up the color that you last used on a shape. It looks like a gradient because that's how the light is responding to it. If I click on it then and rotate it a little bit, press the W key and kind of pull it around a little bit like this, you can see that it's reacting to the light like so. Tip it back a little bit, like so. There you go. So we're going to make a 3D object out of this by opening up its disclosure triangle there and opening up geometry options and increasing its depth. There we go. And you notice that the stroke here remains. It doesn't disappear when you create depth here. When you put it in Ray Trace 3D, the stroke remains stuck to this, so no loss there. Turn it around a little bit like that. There we go. The stroke was green and it stayed green throughout. Now if I add a bevel, let's go over here and add the convex bevel, make the bevel depth pretty significant, like that. Let's go in a little tighter now, Control-Command+, slide it along like so. And now what color will it be if we change the color? Now notice under text it said animate, under shape layer it says add. And if I go over here and say add and I say bevel color, I'm going to get a message saying, wait a minute, you've got to select the thing you want to add this to. So I click on the contents here. I click on Polystar to say this is the thing I'm changing. Now I go to add and I go to bevel and pick a color. Let's change the color to red and you see that it will be separate from the stroke. The stroke does show up right there depending on the width of the stroke. Even though stroke didn't work inside text, it does work here. All right, let's go down to the final one here, a custom shape. If you recall how to make a custom shape, you do that by creating a shape layer, just an empty shape layer. Let me just zoom out a bit here. And then just taking the pen tool and drawing inside that shape layer to create a custom shape. So let's just turn that into 3D here. You see it reacting to the light now. And twist it around too, like so. And let's extrude it a little bit. Go down here, press AA for the 3D related options, including geometry options and material options. We'll increase its extrusion size there and knock it back like that. And we can add bevel edges to that as well. So we'll just knock the bevel edges up and give it, let's say, an angular bevel edge. So there you go. Look at all these possibilities. You can extrude text, a shape that you make with the shape tool, or a shape that you create as a custom shape using the pen tool.